Hey, and welcome back. We are things are moving with the show. You got your pandemic show, the pilot.
The pilots of the series.
Yeah. You see the fancy logo at the beginning of the show. We got Cheryl Lyon.
Cheryl Lyon lives up at Silver Lake Mills, a talented artist.
Yeah. She did the moving dog thing, and it's just. But today, this is big news because we did your pandemic. We did your Rafine. Sewing capital of the world. We did your Augusta Springs for the Brian Buchanan, and then we did Buena Vista and talk. I mean, it was like viral. Buena Vista is like viral, but it's viral anyway. Yeah. And then this week is Nancy. Go ahead and say it.
Okay, it's whiskey, so it's a spirited discussion this week.
Yeah, spirited. And do you drink? Are you a drinker?
I don't drink. Yeah.
I don't drink either. It's funny. And I grew up in a Lutheran in a Baptist town. I've read.
Yeah, and I grew up Episcopalian, and you know what they say about Episcopalians: where there's four, there's always a fifth.
There's always a fifth. Yeah. And so and Lutherans. I mean, I remember Paige McCauley in Danville, Virginia. This is in Danville, Virginia. I mean, we're talking about Southern Baptist Central of the world. So the Lutherans were like, we might as well have been Martians. I mean, they had no idea. And the Catholics, they were across the street from us. So. It was just crazy, and my parents didn't drink, so, and my dad didn't drink, my mom didn't drink, and so we didn't drink, but all the Baptist kids did. I can tell you that. It's in my book. It's in my book coming out. All right, so whiskey. So and I have been to Ireland 3 times, and I know something about the Scotch and the Irish is there's a reason they call Scotch.
Well, that they call them that because they're from Scotland, but yeah, that is part of the story. But the story is actually a Presbyterian story. Believe it or not, the ultimate teetotalers, the Presbyterians. But this is a Presbyterian story, and we'll get into that. You'll find out why.
Yeah, and speaking of Presbyterians, I went on the Southern Presbyterian Taps tour the other day. You go on my Facebook page.
I saw that. That was really cool.
Yeah, we have a Facebook page, and it's called what's the name of the show? Footnotes and
Valley History.
Yeah, there's nothing really on it yet, but we do have the Facebook page. So if you type on that, you can like it, even though there may be nothing to like. I think I may have 1 episode on, but I'm working on the Facebook page with all my technology skills in Facebook, which is not much, except I know how to put videos in and stuff.
Yeah, so anyway, we'll have all the episodes on there, so you can share them and make this go viral.
Yeah. So the Southern Augusta tour, Presbyterian tour, Taps tour was when I was band director at Riverheads. I used to get this call every day from this old guy at the VFW and Steele's Tavern. Maybe is there one there?
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this guy, I can't remember what his name is, but he'd call on the phone about into May sometime. May the 20th. School's ending. You're all excited. You're getting out of school. And John Bowers, who's now the vice president of bank. What's the name of that bank? He's something. They're not sponsoring us, so we don't have to say it. But John, there you go. Okay. So First Bank. He's at First Bank, which could a potential sponsor. So John calls me up, and this phone rings, and you can hear it back in the actually they had a line on it, this cord, and he goes, the guy wants to know if you're going to come play taps at Mount Carmel this year. And I get on the phone, like break stock class. He must have found that class was at 12 o'clock. I call the guy, and he goes, I go, yeah, this is Richard Adams. And he goes, hey, Dick. I mean, well, Richard, yeah. Hey, Dick. Anyway.
So that could have been Junior Lawhorn, could it?
It was Junior Lawhorn. It's exactly who it was.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's just, Ted Lawhorn, right? The good musician.
Yeah.
That's his uncle.
Okay, I didn't know that. Well, there you go, Ted. I'll send this out to Ted this time to make sure. So Junior was the guy. And he goes, Dick, hey, Dick. Anyway, so I did Mount Carmel. Saw Jim Ramsey out there putting the sign up. They're going to be in church next week.
Jim Ramsey has written the history of Mount Carmel, by the way.
And they've got to wear masks in church now, and they can't sing. So it's very un-Presbyterian like anyway. So anyway, but he said he was telling me the rules for going back to church. So anyway, so I went up there and played there in front of the VFW thing like I did, and I took a brick and my phone and my trumpet. And so my cornet. And so what I did is I put the brick on top of the tombstone, laid the trumpet on the brick, and then got just right angle and angled it up, and then turned the phone on and did it, and then came home and put it at it. Then I went to Old Providence, which is Associate Reformed Presbyterian, or as I call them, the Erskinites, because you go to Erskine College, whatever.
Right.
Then I went to New Providence, which is it newer than Old Providence? I don't think it is. I think it's older than
New Providence. Well, there's an argument between New Providence and Old Providence about who's older, and I'm not going to get into that argument. I know that I co-wrote the book on Old Providence, and Catherine Brown, who co-wrote the book to also wrote the book on New Providence. So
Yeah.
um,
So they're still fighting about which one's really New
there's
Providence.
still some discussion about who's older.
Yeah, that's very Presbyterian. And then I went back by Bethel. I went back by Bethel and I played cats back there, and I saw I saw Ray Hauser's grave at because we're the Ray Hausers of the Valley now. I don't know if you know that or not. Anyway, so I saw Ray Hauser's grave at because he grew up in Spotswood, old train depot, as we learned at the Ray Fiend show.
Right.
And then I saw Bob Moody's grave. My good buddy Bob Moody, who was in the Rotary Club with us, and longtime band guy. I used to teach with Bob. And so I haven't sent it to him yet, but I recorded. I couldn't do taps because he wasn't a veteran. But he was a legend, as Ray was. Ray wasn't a veteran either, and he couldn't because of his eyesight. And Bob was kind of his age. He just was the wrong age when he came out.
Stop and visit Francis McFarland's grave, the minister who was there for much of the 19th century, who I did my master's thesis on.
I did not, but that's a whole nother episode.
That's a whole nother episode, and he was from County Tyrone, Ireland.
Oh, really? Okay. Anyway, so then I came back and played that, but I played Shenandoah for Bob, and I hadn't finished editing yet. I thought he'd like that. So.
Oh yeah, he would have.
Got that. So anyway, which leads us to whiskey and the valley, the central Shenandoah Valley. So start up, Nancy, so we can just, not that we're off topic or anything, but this is just what we do.
Okay, well, let's talk about whiskey. But first, let's go back into time.
Wait a minute, I feel like drinking. Hang on a second.
Okay, have a drink. We're so slow getting to the topic that everybody's going to be wanting to take a drink.
Right.
By the time we get to it. But so let's go back to before the Revolution. In America, you didn't want to drink milk because it could be contaminated, and plus dairy was not really a thriving business, a farm business at this time, for a lot of reasons, which we can talk about in another episode. But so there wasn't a lot of milk to drink, but it wasn't considered particularly healthy to drink milk anyway. And it wasn't particularly healthy sometimes to drink water, depending on, especially if you lived in a city where they didn't have indoor plumbing and they dumped the sewage into the streets. So what Americans drank was alcohol, and they drank a lot of it. So much so
it's good for you. That's what they say in Ireland.
It's good for your heart. Well, that's what a lot of people say. In fact, during the Civil War, once the Presbyterians had gotten onto the bandwagon about temperance, they kind of had to relax a little bit because it was considered medicinal, and also got the troops ready to go into war. So let's talk about. So what did they drink? They drank alcohol, but there's different kinds of alcohol. One, there's just beer and hard cider and ale, and that's just fermented grains or apples. It's something that has been allowed to ferment with sugars and yeasts, and that is anything that's 16% or less alcohol. So you got your ale in your pubs and your hard cider, and there were probably a lot of that at your table, at your meal table every day. But you can take that fermented mash of whatever it is, and you can heat it up, and you got to heat it up to 173 degrees. And then,
so you have to take its temperature, just like you have to do these days.
Yeah, this is sort of a pandemic talk in a way, because you got to take temperature, right? Although our temperature, if it's 98.6, it's normal and above that. But this, you got to take it all the way up to 173. Got to take it to 173, and then you got to cool it down in a what was called a worm, which is a coil, a copper coil that is in cold water. So you heat it up to 173, and then you cool it down and condense it back. And
so let me get straight. So the coil is cold. The
coil is immersed in cold water.
Okay, all right.
So you got your still, which is kind of shaped like, they're called turnip stills, and so they're shaped like a big turnip. They're copper, and then you heat it up, the liquid, the mash that's in there, you heat it up to 173, and then it goes through that worm, that coiled worm that is in cold water to cool it back down so it condenses and turns back into liquid. You know, if you're heating it up to 173, it's turning into steam. So the steam's got to vent out in that coil and condense back to liquid. And once it comes back, it's pretty powerful stuff. It's not 16% anymore. If you heat it up and run it through a couple times, you can get up to 100% alcohol. So
that's a lot of alcohol.
But yeah. grain alcohol, which when we were in school, they would sell in the liquor store. They don't sell grain, which is pure alcohol. I mean, you can take a couple sips of that and you'll be pretty loopy. So,
or you can use it as shaving lotion.
Or you can, or hand sanitizer. Again, our pandemic talk here.
Yeah.
And a lot of distillers are now making hand sanitizer. So I bought some at Ollie's. It was a distillery that switched over to making hand sanitizer, and pretty much smells like moonshine to me. But it's hand sanitizer, because the way you kill the bacteria is you put alcohol on it. So you don't want to drink the hand sanitizer though. So then it becomes powerful alcohol, and depending on what grains you use and what techniques you use is how you get scotch or whiskey or brandy or different things like that. But it's the distilling, that whole process. So to make the ale and cider and stuff, you ferment, and then you take that fermented mash and you distill it. So you heat it up and recondense it. And the distilling is what makes these hard spirits. So you've got your easy stuff, and then you've got the hard liquor. And so whiskey was the distillation that they learned in, there's an argument. So some say it was Scotland and some say it was Ireland. But that's where it originates, is the creation of whiskey as your distilled product. Now there's distilled alcohol in all different cultures all over the world, but whiskey comes from Scotland and Ireland.
Is it a wheat-based product?
It is rye-based.
It's a rye-based.
Rye-based, and here in this country, you can use wheat in your distillation. You can also, here we kind of use the North American product, corn, so we mixed rye and corn a lot of times. Or if you just get straight corn, then it becomes bourbon. But rye is the main grain.
Is it gluten-free once it's fermented and stuff?
I don't know that, Richard. Why are you asking me this crazy?
I don't know. I just, because somebody was on a diet.
I would think it might be, but I don't know. Good question. Okay. Yeah. We're asking our viewers out there to tell us the answer to that
studio audience. Yeah.
Yes, that nutritional question. But so this goes back, this distilling and the making of whiskey goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. The legend is that St. Patrick is the one who introduced it to the Irish. He was their patron saint, came over and converted the island of Ireland to Christianity.
Okay.
This is before there was Catholics and Protestants. So Christianity. And so St. Patrick did apparently two things. He ran the snakes out of Ireland. There are no snakes in Ireland. And he taught them how to make whiskey. And he converted them to Christianity. So,
and he got his own day. And
he's got his own day. And
day is an excuse to have a party.
That's right.
Involves whiskey. So it all comes full circle.
All history is connected.
Yeah.
So then the Irish knew about how to do this. So to get the Scotch-Irish part of it that you were talking about, back in the early 1600s, the British, who had conquered most of Ireland, had not, and the native Irish were Catholic.
Okay.
And the British had conquered most of them, but in the northern part of it, in the region called Ulster, they hadn't done a good job of subduing that population of people. So they finally ran them out, so they had, in the rest of the Republic of Ireland, the island, they had pretty much conquered them and subdued them early, and then they kind of built this paling fence across the country so that the northern part was cut off, because the northern part was still the Catholic lords, and they were pretty resistant to British rule, as you might guess, as we ended up doing in the American Revolution, wanting to get rid of them. And so there was a lot of lawlessness, and the British wouldn't go beyond that paling fence. So if you went beyond, it was pretty scary. So that's called going beyond the pale.
Now let me ask you a question. So what's a paling fence? Spell.
Paling fence is a picket fence, but tight together. So if this
Really, was it really tall? Was it like the wall of China? I knew it wasn't that tall, but
well, it was made of wood.
Okay.
It was pickets. It's like a picket fence, but there's no space between the boards.
Okay, all right.
So a palisade fence.
Okay.
What it was. So a paling fence is just a pale. You have boards that get stuck in the ground and they're close together. There's no space between them. You can't peek through. Now, picket fence, the fence posts are far apart, but paling fence, it's like a palisade. So it's for protection, built for protection.
And that went all the way across the top of Ireland?
Yeah, sort of 2/3 of the way up. And then if you ventured beyond, you were going beyond the pale, and that was pretty dangerous. So today we've got the saying, that's going beyond the pale, that's going out into the dangerous territory is what it is. But anyway, the British ran the Irish lords out and subjugated the rest of the country. And then in the early 1600s, about the same time we were setting up Jamestown, they were setting up plantations in the north part of Ireland to try to, it was called the Ulster Plantation, because Ulster is the region, to try to subdue those native Catholics and build up their economy. So what they did is they looked to other parts of their island kingdom and put out the word that they were looking for settlers to farm the land, and particularly to grow flax to make linen to export. So it was a big linen export industry. So they went to the lowlands of Scotland, and they went to Wales to a lesser extent too, and they recruited people who knew how to grow flax and make linen. So people who could weave and spin and were farmers, and they recruited them to move over and settle. And so early 1600s, a whole lot of these people most of the people came from the lowlands of Scotland. And in Scotland, the way Protestantism had worked out over the last few centuries was that they were mostly Presbyterian. And so these Presbyterian Scottish people moved to Ireland in the 1600s and all through the 1600s and became Irish. They called them, it's just like if you move to this country from Germany, your grandparents maybe moved here, you don't call yourself German anymore, you call yourself German American or just American. So these people, by the time they started coming to America in the early 1700s, they considered themselves Irish. The whole way that they became quote unquote Scotch Irish is another story for another episode, but it really relates to something that happened 100 years later, the potato famine in Ireland, and a whole nother wave of settlers who started coming to America. And it was a way to differentiate that first wave in the 1700s from that next wave in the 1800s. The first wave that came to America from the north of Ireland were mostly Presbyterian and mostly farmers, sort of what we would call middle class, educated people. And the ones who came in the potato famine wave, second wave, were penniless and mostly Catholic. And so the established Irish from that first wave wanted to differentiate themselves from the second, so they began calling themselves Scotch Irish.
So this region, so that's the term Ulster Scot. That's
Ulster Scot is the same thing as what we would call Scotch Irish. They came.
John Lewis would have been an Ulster Scot.
John Lewis was absolutely an Ulster Scot. He came from County Donegal, which is now there's politics, of course, always gets involved, and now there is a political country called Northern Ireland that takes up most of that region of Ulster, but not all of it, because County Donegal is still part of the Republic of Ireland, but it's also part of the region of Ulster, and it's where a lot of those early settlers came. But so they came flooding into the Valley of Virginia for a variety of reasons. Again, that's another episode, but they brought with them their Presbyterian heritage. That's why when you went and played taps, all those places, that's why there's so many Presbyterian churches in Augusta County and Rockbridge County and Rockingham County, because those first settlers came and they brought their culture with them, and that culture was Presbyterian. So there were a half a dozen Presbyterian churches here in Augusta County and Rockbridge County that were built before the established church. Virginia had a state church before the Revolution. That was the Anglican Church, or what we call Episcopal Church today. But before the first established church was even built in Augusta County, there were already a half a dozen Presbyterian churches. So they brought everything. They brought their church. They brought their farming techniques. They grew flax. They knew how to make textiles. They knew how to make linen.
You left out whiskey.
Well, I'm getting to that, because they brought their stills too, and they brought their knowledge of how to make whiskey. Now, they didn't bring this into a teetotaling country. The rest of the country drank all the time. As I've said, they drank that ale and cider and things like that. But they also drank the drinks of choice in America. The drink of choice in America was rum. And
I'm getting thirsty again.
Okay,
You keep going.
Take a sip. But the drink of choice was rum. Rum was mostly a New England product, and it was very much attached to the triangle trade, which is the New England, Britain, Africa, Caribbean trade that tied in it was attached to the slave trade. So molasses to rum to slaves was the way it worked, and New England ship captains were the ones that transported molasses from the Caribbean to make rum down in the Caribbean or in New England, and then that same ship would go to Africa and get slaves and take them down to the Caribbean and sell them. So it was a trade that was very profitable, and created that awful system of slavery that we're still feeling the effects on today. But everybody was drinking rum in America, and they were also doing some brandy and wine, and there was lots of alcohol. So much alcohol flowed in colonial and the early republic that there is a book written about that. It's called The Alcoholic Republic, about America's drinking. And amazingly enough, visitors from around the world, visitors from Ireland came to America and commented on how drunk Americans were. But they said they drink so much that they're just sort of immune to it, and they're walking drunk basically.
The herd drunken immunity.
That's right.
Keeping the pandemic theme going here.
Americans drank a lot. I mean, a lot. And
we're coming full circle with all these breweries and stuff. It's coming back.
Exactly. It is a revival. Again, history repeats itself, and so you got to be careful to make sure you get it right when you start repeating things. But so these Presbyterians rolled into the valley, settled the valley, opened it up, and it was about 2/3 in our area, about 2/3 settlement of Presbyterian Ulster Scots, and they brought with them all their skills, which means their stills, and so they started. When you grow things on the farm, they grew their flax for their linen, and then they grew a lot of grain. This became a grain-based farming economy. So the valley was known for, by the Revolution, the valley was growing a lot of grain, so much grain that this became the wheat capital of the world. The Shenandoah Valley did, and it also became the textile capital of the world and the whiskey capital of the world.
Where were the textiles?
Where were the textiles?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
When you say textile capital of the world, as opposed to factories, I mean, I think of factories.
No. These were, for the most part, in the 18th century. These were just small weavers who might have had a shop, with 2 or 3 looms. So your trade might have been that. Jockey John Robinson that I talked about last week when we were talking about Buena Vista. he was a trained weaver. So
Okay.
these are small, it was a small cottage industry. There were some factories, but that's getting a little bit later.
Yeah.
So,
But the skill set. My brother, I'm from Danville,
mhm,
and originally, and my brother told me his mother-in-law is from Rock Ridge County,
right,
and she said that they actually Dan River Mills, which was a huge weaving, I mean,
right.
they actually went up in the mountains and recruited people like in the early 1900s because they knew these skills, which I guess have been passed around.
Right. So the industrialization of weaving really started in New England around the Revolution, and then moved into the South probably after the Civil War. Um, and it was more cotton that was being woven then.
Yeah.
But so what was happening here in Augusta County is they were growing flax and making linen. And they were also growing another product called hemp, which is cannabis. So they were growing that and making cloth out of it as well.
Coming full circle again.
And so the skills for growing and processing fibers, flax fibers into linen and hemp fibers into hempen cloth are almost identical. So right around the Revolution, a little before, during, and after, these same farmers were heavily into hemp cloth, which makes you make canvas, you make materials that, like covered wagons,
Okay.
hempen cloth. Another little interesting word thing, find our history hidden in our words. The word canvas actually comes from the word cannabis. It's just a slur of that word. And hemp, cannabis is a very old fiber plant, as is linen. So these Irish Ulster Scots knew how to do that fiber, and they knew how to farm. Once hemp kind of went out, it got replaced with a lot more grain production.
Okay.
And that grain production tended toward wheat with that side, and corn with rye. So this became the milling capital of the world.
Thus the so-and-so mill road every time you go around.
There are dozens and dozens of mill roads in Augusta County, and there are a few. So, but if you're growing grain, you can make flour, and you can also, with some of the grain, with the wheat, and then with the corn and the rye, you can make whiskey, and you can make rye flour and you can make cornmeal, but you can't make a lot of money at that. So so you can take that grain and distill it. So milling and distilling are the two industries that come out of this grain-based economy that was the Shenandoah Valley. And in fact, if you really want to learn more about this, we've got a great book. Look here, it's called Grain into Gold. And
put that back up there again. I want to see that thing. Who wrote it?
Nancy Sorrells and Ken Coons.
I've heard those names before. Okay.
Yeah. So we actually, Ken Coons is a history professor at VMI down in Lexington. And several years ago, we put together an exhibit called Grain into Gold, Milling and Distilling on the Dividing Waters.
Excuse me, can you say that 10 times in a row? I'm just kidding.
Grain into Gold. So we put an exhibit together at the Brownsburg Community Museum, which is a fantastic little museum. And once the pandemic is over, we're working on another exhibit down there now on general stores, which you're going to love. So watch for that, the opening of that exhibit. But Grain into Gold was there for 2 years, and it was about the milling and distilling, and on the dividing waters, which we're calling the Upper Valley, where the waters divide. The Shenandoah River flows north and the James River flows south and east. So this is the dividing water. But those two, so half the room was milling and half the room was distilling. And we loved the exhibit so much, and everybody loved it so much, that we turned it, when we took the exhibit down, we took all the panels and turned them into pages in this book, and then photographed all the, you can see if you look in it, all the,
oh yeah.
See, so all the items that were in the exhibit, we took photographs of them and put them in the book. And that book then was published by the Mountain Valley Preservation Alliance, And it's for sale at the Augusta County Historical Society if you want it for $25. It's full color throughout. And
downtown in the Smith Center, right across from
Center, you can
right
contact
across from
me.
the fanciest parking lot you've ever seen.
I will even autograph it for you and get Ken to autograph it for you.
Oh,
So
is Ken still teaching at VMI?
Ken's still teaching, but I'm pretty sure he's thinking about retiring.
Okay.
After this coming year. So
okay.
So that we can write more books together.
And what were the names of? Give me some famous names of people that were distillers.
Okay, so a couple of the big ones are the Baumgartner Distillery.
Who became a judge? Right.
Okay. What's that?
Who became a judge?
Well, the descendants of the family did become a judge, but the Baumgartner Distillery has an interesting history. So even though the Ulster Scots were the ones who brought it here, Baumgartner is a German name. So the Germans, in about a third of the people who settled in Augusta County were Germans. About 2/3 were Scotch-Irish, and you had a few English sprinkled in there too. But they all intermarried and traded skills and ideas. So the distilling idea may have been brought by the Irish, but the Germans picked up on it pretty quickly. So some of the big ones in Augusta County were the Baumgartners and the Clemmers. And by the 1840s and 50s, the wheat that was grown here in the valley was either ground here or ground in Richmond. It was shipped out mostly to Richmond, and was then sold all over the world. It was shipped out, went around the tip of South America from Richmond and went to California, and the California 49ers were baking their sourdough bread with Valley flour, Valley wheat. And the California 49ers had to wash that bread down with something, and in the gold camps. And so they were washing it down with whiskey. And so the Virginia whiskeys made in the Valley were pretty big sellers, apparently, in the gold camps. Old Baumgartner was one of them, but all these distilleries had several different brands. And some of the distillers were also what they called rectifiers, which a rectifier takes the distilling and then they mix maybe different vintages of they purify it out, get all the impurities out, and then they maybe take a little bit of the 49 batch and put it in with the 48 batch and create their own blends that have their own fan. Every blend had its own fan. So another one in Augusta County were the Clemmers, but Augusta County in 1850 was producing 250,000 gallons of whiskey commercially a year. That doesn't count the people who had stills on their farm that may have done 50-gallon batches or things like that. But the commercial distilleries were producing, which led the whole valley. 250,000 gallons of whiskey was going out of Augusta County a year and going all over the world, and had great fans in Richmond. It was bottled, and the Baumgartners ended up hooking up with a guy named McQuaid, and then Baumgartner McQuaid whiskey was sold, was wholesaled around the country. The Clemmers were another one. I just found out about one the other day, Sommerdeen whiskey. I didn't even know Sommerdeen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that eventually got absorbed into the Clemmers. There was a distillery right outside on Middlebrook Avenue, right outside of Stanton. We've got a picture of that one that I'll send you, and you can put up on this video. So here's another interesting fact. Think a little bit of trivia fact. Okay, yes. Churchville, named for having so many churches, right?
Go ahead.
What's the creek that flows through Churchville?
Whiskey Creek.
Whiskey Creek, right.
Buddy JT used to play in the band Whiskey Creek, which the mayor of Stanton was the lead singer in.
Right. And
go ahead, say that.
You didn't just make up that name. It flowed right into Hunley Distillery. In fact, you can go to Hunley Distillery Road, just outside of Churchville today. There was a huge distillery there. At the same time that all those, if you look on the 1885 map of Hotchkiss map of Churchville, you see Church, and Whiskey Creek and Hunley Distillery. So it was perfectly, and that's the thing is today we associate the Presbyterians with temperance, with, for the most part, with grape juice in their communion services. Not the case. Not the case in the 1700s and early 1800s. 7 of the 8 elders of New Providence Presbyterian Church in Brownsburg were distillers, had stills. In Augusta County, after the Revolution, in those years after the Revolution, if you check the estate inventories, which is an inventory of someone's belonging that's recorded in the courthouse. If they die, you have to go in and make a list of their belongings because you got to pay taxes. So one estate inventory in 4 in Augusta County in the years right after the American Revolution had stills in them. So this was a drinking county. And all those nice Presbyterian churches that you went and played, and a lot more, Augusta Stone, Tinkling Spring, all of those had great big new buildings built in the 1830s and 40s.
Fancy brick buildings.
Nice Greek Revival buildings. They all looked almost alike. They were kind of Greek temples, and they were all funded with liquor money. They were all funded by distillery money. But at the same time, you know, what the Presbyterians gave, the Presbyterians also took away. And by 1811, the Presbyterian General Assembly, which is the national gathering of all the Presbyterian churches, started worrying about intemperance, about drinking to excess. And in those days, when you were a Presbyterian, they only had communion season 3 or 4 times a year. And before you were able to take communion, you had to go before the session, and they had to question you, and they would say, well, we understand that you've been seen drunk in public. You were drunk at the turkey shoot last week. And if they
Cakewalk.
If they apologized and said they were all right for it, they might be able to give them a token to be able to take communion. But sometimes they didn't let them take communion because they weren't as apologetic as they should be, and or they were hauled before the session and tried and banned from having communion because they abused the spirits. So by 1811, the General Assembly started thinking that maybe there's a problem, and started moving toward temperance. So then all through the 1800s, you get these 2 dueling things: whiskey, people were distilling and drinking to excess, and then you had the temperance movement.
All right, let's go back to the pandemic. You get your mask people and your no mask people.
That's right. Yeah, it became political, just like everything else in this country. And so you started having people who they didn't just drink. Temperance means that you temper it, that you
moderation.
Yeah, moderation. But the temperance movement became anti-alcohol, and so temperance wasn't temperate because some of the people weren't being temperate with their drinking, and so you started getting temperance armies, temperance societies, temperance clubs.
The women's temperance league.
The Women's Temperance League carried nation agitation. They would go in and anti-saloon league. They would go in and these women would go in and take their axes and chop up saloons. So by the 1830s, you started having temperance army marches, and stores would sell soda that was flavored in different flavors that was non-alcohol. At the same time, the saloons and the bars were still doing really well. And the pharmacies were doing really well. So you could not drink, but you could get your medicine, that had cocaine and things like that in it. So the
Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew, all those things were really just
well, not all of those, but Coca-Cola was named because it had cocaine in it.
Yeah.
So
soft drinks were invented. That's the term, soft drink.
Right. Soft drink was the antidote for alcohol.
So the people that were putting out the drugs, or that are distributing the drugs, it created the soft drink.
Right.
Yes, there we go. Gotcha.
There you go. Right.
Not that alcohol is not.
Does that make sense? Right. So then you have the first temperance sermon and temperance revival, I guess, in the area was held in the Lexington Presbyterian church.
Of course it was.
So, of course. And the Presbyterians, all the other churches got on the temperance wagon too and started forming societies, but the Presbyterians were the biggies in it. So circle back to that Baumgartner's distillery. It was located across the road from Bethel Presbyterian Church.
Played test there just the other day.
Bethel Presbyterian Church had the area's biggest distillery located in its backyard. And that worried, that Francis McFarland that I told you about, that worried him a lot. Now, Mr. Baumgartner's wife was big into the Presbyterian Church, but the distiller himself, not so much. And but the family would entertain, and the Reverend Francis McFarland, who was at Bethel from about the 1830s to 1870s, worried in his diary that his sons were at a party over at the Baumgartner's house, which is a Bethel Green, was a beautiful house, still there today. And he worried that there would be drinking and dancing.
That's a real preacher's kids right there, man.
Yeah, and his sons, though, get this, his sons assured him that there was no problem at all. They were going to a different room, so he wouldn't. Do you believe that? Right.
Yeah.
So Baumgartner's distillery was a huge distillery, and there were numbers of others of them. Not as many mills in Augusta County, but a lot of distilleries as well, all through the 1800s. And the thing is, the reason why you had all these mills and distilleries is because of the water. You have all this water, and it's all water powered. You needed the water to make the whiskey. You needed the water to run the mill machinery. And so a lot of times they would locate right next to each other. Milling and distilling would be part of the same process. George Washington did it. He had a mill and a distillery right next to it. He was our number one, the father of our country and the father of distilling. He had a huge distillery. Brought a distiller over from Scotland to show him how to do everything. George Washington, get this, George Washington, there was no election that was held without alcohol to bribe the voters. And George Washington ran for House of Burgesses. This is years and years before, he was General Washington and helped fight the Revolution. But he was a young, upstanding man in his 20s, wanted to hold political office. So he ran for House of Burgesses. And he represented sort of the Winchester area of that part of the valley. And he lost. And he said he lost because he didn't swill the planters with enough bumbo. The next time he ran, he rolled out the liquor barrels. He gave them whiskey, he gave them rum, he gave them wine. It was something, I can't remember how many gallons per voter, but he won.
Fiddles, accordions, the whole thing.
Yeah, he won the next time because he swilled the planters with bumbo. And that became the practice. There was an artist, his name was Caleb Bingham. He was born in Grottoes, Virginia, right in Augusta County, just on the Augusta County side, next to the Middle River. He went out to the Midwest and became a famous artist in the 1840s and 50s. And he painted all these political scenes of country politics, rural America politics. And one of them was the election. And it is a great picture. We'll throw it up on the video. But, there's alcohol, there's drunks, there's people telling each other who to vote. You had to write your vote on a piece of paper and go up and give it to the guy. It was no secret ballot at this time. So alcohol was tied into our politics from the very beginning as well. So Christian Baumgartner, back to them. Baumgartner, all these distilleries thrived until 1916 when temperance caught up with the nation and the politics. And so in 1916, Virginia went dry. The temperance people won out in the legislature, and so everything was banned. So Baumgartner's distillery went out of business, and we started erasing from our memory the idea that we were all drunks in the first nation. So
been studying that. They've been scanning brains at University of Virginia.
Yes. In 1820, America I've got this written down here somewhere. Let's see. In May 1830. In 1830, Americans consumed 7.1 gallons of alcohol. Americans over 16 consumed 7.1 gallons of alcohol per person per year, and most of that was hard liquor, rum and whiskey and things like that. And then temperance started taking hold. And in 1840, there was the biggest drop in American history. They only consumed 4 gallons. So the temperance movement was taking hold. So we started right then whitewashing the fact that our ancestors were alcoholics. And then we culminated that with 1916, Virginia went dry. Baumgartner Distillery was dismantled, and Bethel Church had its biggest moment in its history. They took some of the beams from that dismantled distillery and refurbished the church. So they brought demon whiskey to its knees by bringing it into the church. So the doors in Bethel Church today, and part of the
ceiling beam or something.
Yeah, the beam up at the front of the church and all was made from the beams at the Baumgartner Distillery. So that's just, I think, the funniest story. 2 years later, 1918, America across the country goes liquor free. The Prohibition. It was the 18th Amendment, and that eliminated alcohol.
I bet Miss Kitty didn't like that.
Miss Kitty didn't like that at all, and we were dry until 1933 when the 21st Amendment restored it. So
took a depression.
That's exactly right. It took a depression, and it took then a war to really get liquor back to where it needs.
Some of it was the tax base too. Yeah,
well, taxes. So you know what? So everybody calls this thing that the Augusta County people were, the liquor they were brewing, they call it moonshine. It wasn't moonshine, it was whiskey. Moonshine is illegal production. So Prohibition created moonshine. And then now that, because it was illegal, so they carried it out and sold it secretly under the light of the moon rather than in daylight. Mm-hmm. And so after Prohibition was over, moonshine's still made today because they're trying to get rid of the revenuers. They don't want to pay taxes on it. The distilleries are paying tax, but if you're making it at home and selling it illegally, it's moonshine because you're trying to avoid taxes. So actually, moonshine was made early on in American history. George Washington, the founding distiller, had his first political crisis on his hands because whiskey wasn't taxed. Everybody could make it, but then after the American Revolution, 1790s, the Congress decided to put a tax on whiskey so that they could pay for the American Revolution. And the farmers in Western Pennsylvania in particular said, you're hurting our ability to sell our product. So those grain farmers it was called the Whiskey Rebellion. It was the first crisis of George Washington's presidency, and he had to go in and put down the rebellion. So those people who continued to make their whiskey and fly under the radar screen were making moonshine. That tax was eliminated in 1802. It was put on again to pay for the War of 1812 for a couple years. It was not argued about like it was in the Whiskey Rebellion. Then it was taken off once the war was paid for. It was put on again in the Civil War to pay for the mounting costs of the Civil War. And guess what? It never went away after that. So after that, any distillers in Augusta County who weren't getting their license and weren't paying their taxes were making moonshine.
Okay. Man, that's a lot of stuff right there. That's a lot.
And I could tell you a lot more. I should tell you that the word whiskey actually comes from the Gaelic word, and and I'm going to butcher this word, but my friends in Ireland told me how to say it. It's an old Gaelic word, and it's something like uskabe, and then it was shortened to Uski, and then it became whiskey. So it's the word is a Gaelic word, which, you know, is Scotland and Ireland.
There's actually a tune. I should get a recording of this and put on it called "Whiskey Before Breakfast."
Yep.
I play it in contra dances, and it's a jig reel thing. So
you could get the tune. There's a devil in a bottle for the theme song for the temperance people, just to show you how much America got whitewashed, that we didn't drink that much, and you know that we were temperate all along. And there was a Currier and Ives, you know, print that they did a lot of prints, very popular in American history. You've probably seen Currier and Ives pictures of people ice skating or something like that. Very patriotic. And in the 1840s, they put out a print of George Washington saying farewell to his officers, and he's standing. His officers are all standing, and they're raising a glass. And George Washington has a glass in his hand, probably a brandy glass or something like that. He has a glass in his hand, and there's on the table next to him is a decanter of some kind of alcohol and glasses there. And he's raising a toast to his officers who are saying farewell to each other because the war is over. That print was reissued in the 1870s during the American Centennial, 1876, something like that. It was reissued exactly same, except for they changed. George Washington is no longer holding a glass of alcohol. He's got his hand on his lapel. And on the table is his hat. No alcohol in sight in the picture. So that's how we kind of whitewash our history to only remember the things we want to remember. And we're really good at that.
Nothing like a little 18th century Photoshop, is it? I tell you what.
Right. I mean, even today, when I tell the Presbyterian, there are some Presbyterians who think it's great to learn more about their history. There are some who are just refuse to believe that their church was built on whiskey money.
Right.
But it's Valley history, and it's fun.
So, all right, Nancy. Well, we're going to have to wind down here, or my computer's going to blow up from recording all this. This is great.
Right.
And we'll be back soon, and we'll see you next week on Footnotes in Valley History with Nancy Sorrells and Richard Adams.